Writers are always smarter than editors.
Wow. Your lips got.
So can I quote you on that? Well, I think we could kind of go ahead and get underway. I'm sure Mike DeCarlo is going to join us here in just a moment. But thank you, everybody, for joining us for members of the Lantern Corps with Ron Marz, Darryl Banks, Steve Englehart, Scott Kolins, and Mike DeCarlo whenever he gets over here. How's it going, guys? Is it kind of going good for you guys so far?
Doing great.
Yeah.
Doing great.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it.
This is no bullshit. This is a really good con. This is, everybody who puts this together, everybody who's working at it has been terrific.
That's good to hear, because you don't always hear that.
We do cons that sometimes don't always go that great. So this is nice.
I will tell you a true story, which is about 2 hours ago. I was talking to some people, and we were talking about how good this con is. And I said, this is really a first-class operation. They really do this right. And I turn around, and there's Mark, the guy who runs the con, standing right there, which I did not know he was there, but
Oh, I'm sure he
I got a lot
appreciated
of
that.
Good timing.
Yeah.
Good timing.
Yeah. But that's honestly true. It's a first-class operation.
So I don't know if you guys go to a bunch of shows or not, but this is really great to have as your local, basically, because not all shows are like this. Not
No.
Even some of the big ones are not always so smooth.
This is true.
No.
So what are your guys' first memories of the Green Lantern? What was kind of your first exposure to him as maybe a kid, and then how did you kind of get into actually working on the character?
I think my first exposure was. Can you guys hear us if we're not leaning in the mic more often? The
So
vast,
luckily, I think the
vast crowd is
small
there.
enough.
There's so many of us in.
I think my first exposure was those Filmation cartoons from, I guess, the late 60s,
About 66, around there.
which I must have seen in reruns when I was a kid. And there were a few Hal Jordan Green Lantern episodes. And I was like, well, who's that? And then, later on, when Hal started to show up in Super Friends, in the later seasons when they had 12 superheroes instead of 5. And so that was my exposure to him to a great extent. It was animation. It wasn't the comics. I can remember, I think the first Green Lantern book I ever saw was the one with Speedy with having was about to
yeah.
that freaked the shit out of me. It was
Well, I
it was
think
one of
that's
those
kind of
things.
the point of it, though, right?
Well, I think it must have been my older brother had a box of old comics in the basement, and that was one of them. And I would put, my brother is 12 years older than me, so I would look through this box of comics probably before I could even read, and that was a cover that I kept coming back to because it was creepy and weird,
Kind of spoke to you.
but I thought someday I shall grow up to be a junkie.
Or to yell at one.
Well, I guess I'm old enough. I got back into comics in '66. I'd outgrown comics to that point, and then somebody handed me a Spider-Man and said, "You got to look at this," and that brought me back into the whole thing. So we were trying to remember where Green Lantern would have been in numbers in the mid '60s, but what I did was run right out. I spent the whole summer going to used bookstores and stuff, buying up old comics, and so pretty quickly I was aware of the early Green Lantern stuff, the John Broome, Gil Kane, Julie Schwartz Green Lanterns, and I just loved the mythology of the whole thing. I mean, Julie stole it part and parcel from other places, but that's what I always loved about Green Lantern, was not only the characters, but just the universe that they inhabited, That's all I got. That's where I found it.
And you, Darryl Banks, artist of Green Lantern?
Which is ironic. Growing up, I really wasn't a Green Lantern fan. It wasn't until some of the miniseries would come out, the Joe Staton era, which I believe you wrote some of those, sir.
I wrote stuff with Joe. Yeah, I don't know. I think he did stuff. He did other issues too. So
Some stuff with Len too.
And Englehart.
And I remember the Brian Bolland covers. It was a mini series, and so those are definitely the first I read. And as far as the first I've seen, it was probably the Neil Adams stuff.
Yeah.
But around that time, I was more, diehard Marvel.
Okay.
But there was just something about some of the Green Lantern miniseries. I could pick them up, and it was, it had a beginning, middle, and end. And I really liked where they were going with it. I remember, was the
Hate to
character?
cut you off real quick. Mike DeCarlo.
It's Mike
Welcome, welcome. Yes.
And we're still on the first
Sequel.
question. You haven't
Yeah.
missed much.
The first question was, where the hell is Mike DeCarlo?
It's like, where's Waldo?
Where's Walt?
Right.
Well, you were talking about our early initial exposure to the character Green Lantern and what we thought of it. But with me, I think also it was artistic and conceptually. But I just remember always thinking, if you could make anything you could think of with this ring, I didn't get the whole vacuum sweeper boxing glove thing. I'm just thinking of what I would make if I had that. And I kept sketchbooks of, I would make this kind of stuff. I just kind of filed it away, never thinking that I would ever get a chance to use that stuff. Yeah, I still have all that stuff.
That sounds like bullshit. You're making that up.
You know, I'm here. I can run home real quick and go see. I had a lot of ideas on how I would tweak costumes and stuff like that. But like I said, I was growing up. It was more Marvel, but I just loved the concept of Green Lantern. So fast forward, when I got a chance to work on the book, it's like I was like, oh, I've already got a whole pool of sketchbooks and things I can pull from to have Mr. Rayner conjure up during his adventures.
Cool. I was in that in-between stages of all this stuff. He was actually one of the first DC heroes that I hooked onto. But that would have been the Mike Grell time. And Mike Grell's Legion and Mike Grell's Green Lantern and all that stuff. I was, for the kid that I was, that was just the pinnacle. It was the greatest stuff. It was so much fun to read and watch and all that. And I loved all the crazy things to do with the ring. That was the main thing I did. I like the mythology and stuff of that too, but I always liked that, at that time with Hal anyway, that, he always stuck out so much from that crowd. He had that crowd behind him. He had all that almost like family stuff or whatever behind him, but he was always, way in the forefront, in front of the rest of the crowd. He was always the one like dissenter that was in there. He was always the one who would tell off the Guardians when they'd say, no, you have to do this and pay attention to these rules, and he'd tell them off, like, you want to tell off any of your parents or teachers or whatnot. So it screamed to me so much fun when I was a kid.
I think it's Mike's turn. Yeah, everybody else is gone.
He did.
No, I did mine. It's up to you.
My initial interest in Green Lantern was because I was such a fan of Gil Kane artwork to this day. But his artwork, I think usually was with Joe Giella, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably, yeah.
But he was such a dynamic storyteller and such a great anatomist, and very dynamic in his compositions, his angles. He pushed the limits, especially for DC Comics back then, which were a little more staid. So that was always filed in the back of my mind, how great an artist Gil Kane was. And then in 1982, yes, 41 years ago, they offered if I would like to work with Joe Staton. It was, I think, one of the very first titles that I kind of stayed with for about 2 years. 82, 83, at least. And it was great working on that character. It was great working with Joe. Wonderful art. I still remember it quite fondly. Great visuals. I always loved his costume. So I was, and it had, universal elements in it, other planets and galaxies and all other stuff.
Party girls.
And it fueled my imagination. So the Batman and Green Lantern were always the two most interesting DC characters for me. Batman because I loved the Dark Knight aspect of it, and Green Lantern because I just thought the flights of fancy in it were different than most of the other DC characters.
Yeah.
Anyway, long explanation, but
No, it's great. So, what's kind of the process of trying to come up with like a new power ring construct, something new for the Green Lantern to use with his ring? Because that's got to be hard. He's done so many different things over the years.
It's actually, for me, it wasn't, because I already had
You said you had a
a
backlog.
running start. There was a mandate that wasn't necessary, but my editor, Kevin, would say, never have Kyle make the same construct twice. Now, he could make a shield twice, but the shield has to be different. Let's say if it's a medieval shield in this issue, the next issue, if he makes the shield, it's got to be like a turtle shell or something. Just mix it
Okay.
up. But I was going to do that anyway, so I remember that conversation. Like, I was going to do that anyway because I don't want to make the same stuff over and over.
Right.
So, I created what I liked. I mean, Kyle, like, oh, he seems to have this like Japanese animation influence. I'm like, because I do. So it's like, his creativity is really just a reflection of me. So I thought about, if it's interesting to me, hopefully it'll also be interesting to the readers. So that was kind of my standpoint for his ring creation.
Yeah, it was kind of, it was, I guess it was an unwritten rule, but we all knew the rule is you can't make the same thing twice. So, which, like I could say he makes a shield, and then it's his problem. But I would try to come up with, specific suggestions that, it's a, medieval shield with the horns on it or whatever. But it just, it was, and still it's a special effects book. If you do an issue of Green Lantern, you didn't have to make them cool shit with the ring. You didn't do your job, because that's what the book is about. So, working with Darryl and working with Paul Pelletier and Jeff Johnson on the book, and Scott and I did. What did we do?
Green Lantern Plus, right?
Yeah. Obviously, it's easy for me to say, Green Lantern creates an armada of spaceships that
We got
1,000 ships from all different alien cultures. You take it.
why artists hate writers?
Oh, and well, you should, because we laugh about it. Because we have the secret writer meetings, don't we, Steve?
Yeah.
To me, obviously, the artist is hugely important, whatever book you're doing. The book that you write is only as good as the artist you're drawing with. That's a truism. But on Green Lantern, I thought it was even more important because of that special effects aspect of the book. If the ring stuff didn't look cool, the book just kind of laid there.
I always felt, especially when we got to see when Kyle came around, I felt like there was more of a difference at that point where Gil had made up so much before that of what the Green Lantern power looked like and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, by the time I would have come around with any of that, I thought it was really cool where it was becoming much more where you could tell the personality of the Green Lantern person that was doing it. It wasn't necessarily a set kind of pattern that it had been before that. And it was mostly just because it was always Hal.
And I think that printing technology got better too. That's
Yes.
also an aspect of we could just do a lot more. We could do a lot more and have it look like green special effects and glow stuff that was not was not as available up to the mid '80s or so.
The choice of stuff is, that Hal would make the boxing gloves or whatever, all the stuff that we enjoyed as kids. But then Kyle came around, and Kyle was an artist and whatnot. So all of a sudden he would do very artistic things with it, or he'd do things of kids of his age, of that era kind of thing. So he'd make guns or different things going on too. And when John Stewart would pick it up, then we found out that I don't know if that was more who had kind of organized that he had been a city planner or something. He had like construction or engineering background.
Architect.
That's what it is. So then all of a sudden we started seeing all these things about him where he was making like, walls or some sort of constructs of things. And I always thought that was really cool. And that's personally, if I had more time on Green Lantern, that's what I would have liked to have done either with Stewart or one of those characters, is to more push it towards a sci-fi thing of what the ring would do. I got to write a short story on Green Lantern Corps. And that's what I tried to push in all those little short stories, was to push those geometric shapes or different things that the ring would do in more of a science fiction, Star Trek almost kind of way, instead of the fun things that they would do all the time. But the medieval shield and all that stuff is cool because it came from Kyle or different things. But gearing it toward each individual Green Lantern I thought was a neat way to go. Like, if I had the chance now when we're doing Out in Sewer or we're doing those other aliens, I would so want to like twist it into
Alien stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, everything you're talking about obviously was after my time because we didn't have a rule about doing that. I never thought about, I would just say to Joe Staten, who was my artist, I would just say, you know, he does the thing, whatever, and let Joe come up with the visual
Right.
for it.
Yeah.
I do remember when I put together the Green Lantern Corps in my era, somebody said to me, well, how can you do a team where they all have the same power? And I said, it's not about the power, it's about the team, you know, it's all these guys. So I was, you know, I did see them as separate things, but I wasn't at all concerned with what each one would do with the ring.
Yeah.
I left that to Joe.
Yeah.
I think, and I've never written, but I think Green Lantern presents, the whole concept presents different challenges for writers because there's this enormous unbridled power and it's got to be used almost instantaneously depending on the situation. Plus there's morals and ethics involved in how you use it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be a special person, as of course the whole concept is, to be worthy of wearing that ring. And I think that makes it harder to write than other characters. To me, it would.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it wasn't to you guys, but
I don't know. I just making shit up. How about you, Steve?
that does reduce it to its most primitive. I just make shit up.
Yes.
So is there ever a time where you kind of come up with an idea for a ring construct, but it doesn't make sense for the story after you really think about it? Or is there any time it's been like turned down, like, no, that's too much?
I can recall, not with
I see
Darryl-
Scott kind of nod his head over there.
Not with Darryl or Scott, but I can recall sometimes where I put something in the script and the page came back with something completely different and still really cool, you know, which is fine because I get credit for it.
Hey, there you go.
Like, oh my God, that time you put that thing in that issue, and I'm thinking I didn't do that. That's kind of, but of course you say, why yes, I thought long and hard about that, and but again, you ride the coattails of your artist. The runs that I've had that have worked well, it's because I click with the artist. When Mike and I were on Thor for a year, I did not click with the artist, not him, the penciler, and it just kind of laid there, and Thor is one of my favorite characters.
As was mine.
And just, and I was like, we got page 1 of my run in, and I went, ugh. And I'm like, oh shit, this isn't gonna work. But then, then you're in the deep end of the pool, and you just gotta try to swim. So, it has a great deal to do with the magic of working with somebody that is your co-author, your co-storyteller. And when it clicks, it's great. And when it doesn't click, it becomes too much like a job.
Well, true. The two pencilers in particular that I worked with, they both had like a 7 or 8 issue run or more. They did not like me. And I don't know why, because I wasn't messing about with what they were doing. But they made it very plain to the editor. I know we're talking about Green Lantern, I'm sorry. You brought up a bad memory of Thor. There was the Fantastic Four and Thor growing up because I was a big Kirby fan. And when I got offered Thor, it was like, ah. Then we had that Bruce Xavier and then MC Wyman.
Yeah.
And I didn't like either of their artwork. And for whatever it's worth, they didn't like me. They never told me why. But it was one of those things you look forward to something your whole life and then you get it and it was like, ugh. Just like you didn't like what they were doing.
It's because and again, this is the alchemy of putting different people together on a project, and when it all clicks, it's not even like work. And when it doesn't work, you're just like, a brief aside. So I was writing Thor, and Mike was inking it. And we had a guy named Bruce Zick that was the penciler. After the editor had told me, we're not sure who's going to draw the book. So if you have somebody that you'd like to, like us to look at, and so I went and got one of my buddies, and he did a pinup, and it was Cully Hamner, who was working at DC on Mosaic, which is a Green Lantern story, to bring it all back to Green Lantern.
It was around then. It was back then.
Yeah, so it was long
I didn't even
ago. And I'm like, here's my friend Cully. Can we have him draw Thor? And they went, oh no, we already hired him. I'm like, you told me like 3 days ago to go find somebody, and I did. Oh yeah, well, here's this guy Bruce Zick, and it's very Kirby, and it just it wasn't good.
And right from the
Wasn't great.
start, I'm sorry, I don't mean to deviate, but
No, we're gonna tell you.
brought up
We're
the
gonna tell you.
Thor on my Thor side. The editors right away told me, we don't like Bruce Zick. Can you fix him up? Told me that. And then when I would do what the editor liked, Bruce Zick hated me. Why aren't you doing what? Well, dude, you're not paying me. The editors pay me. I got, So it was just so unpleasant.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for bringing
it was
it
a-
up. Now I have a bad stomach.
I'm happy to rub a little lemon juice in that. But it was so the weird thing to again diverge. But so eventually Bruce Zick got removed from the book because I was like, this isn't working, man. Like somebody got to go. And if you want it to be me, okay. But and finally the editor screwed up his courage and fired Bruce Zick via fax. And then we got MC Wyman, who sucked in a different way, and so a year or two later,
Slinging mud everywhere.
this is what you showed up for, right?
So did Cully ever come on Thor?
No.
But the thing about Bruce Zick was he had cool, like his backgrounds were awesome. Like he could do landscapes and environments like anybody's business. It was awesome. So a couple years later, I go to see the animated Hercules movie from Disney, right? And I look up on the screen and I'm like, motherfucker, that's Bruce Zick's backgrounds. And sure enough,
It was.
he had designed all the backgrounds in that movie. And they
Oh,
looked
nice.
awesome. But that dude couldn't draw people to save his life.
And he's the only person I knew who got a personal drawing from Jack Kirby and told Jack it sucked. True story.
What?
He
Wow.
told Jack Kirby, who drew this beautiful thing for him, it's not too good, Jack. I've seen you do much better. I mean, who has the balls to do that?
Wow.
Wow.
That's not.
I'm
That's
flabbergasted at that.
DC did that with the Superman.
Yeah.
Kirby's.
Holy cow.
So now that we've totally besmirched Bruce Zick,
So anyway, Green Lantern.
Anyway.
he's back to Green Lantern.
So, are
I
there
wanna hear more about
are there real big artistic challenges when coming up with light-based powers, and with a character that's so focused on emotion, does that have to kind of correlate into those powers?
Not really, because it helps to have a script that kind of helps you navigate where you're going with this. It's not just look what he can create. It's more like why. It's funny. Two of my probably in my top two favorite ring creations Kyle's ever made was number one is the train he made to hit Mongol with, slam track. And number two was there was like an apartment fire, and this kid was in the building. He was trying to get him to jump, and you had Kyle create like a hamburger. The kid goes, a hamburger, and Kyle goes, just go with it, kid. I don't know why. I love that scene. I think about it all the time. Like it was so simple. It's more like Kyle is still essentially learning, and it's kind of like, all right, kids like hamburgers. Yeah, I made a giant green hamburger. They'll jump on it like a sponge, like a trampoline. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I do.
But it's kind of like that's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, I mean, part of the job on the scripting end is just to come up with a story where you can showcase that cool sort of recreation stuff. If I got into a script and realized, there's not too much going on here that is like that's what you guys show up for, right? That's like you show up to see the cool stuff. That you show up for the special effects. So if I had got, if I got into a script and realized, there's really not enough, not enough, sexy stuff going on here. There's not enough of what you're showing up for. I would go back through and figure out, okay, well, this quieter scene needs to be, turned up to 11 or 12. And honestly, the joy of the job for me, at least, was to be throwing out these ideas, and then these guys come and do their thing and make us look like geniuses. I think Slam Track was yours, right?
Was it?
Like I think
That was a while ago.
I think
That was
I
over
suggested
30
a
years
train, but you put Slam
Oh,
Track
okay,
on it,
yeah, like
and
Amtrak.
I'm
dad
like,
jokes.
well, that's pretty smart.
May I ask a consensus? And it's Green Lantern related. I never saw a Green Lantern movie, whatever that was. 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh,
I heard
the one we all try to
I
forget about.
heard nothing but horror stories.
Yeah.
Is that how everybody feels who's seen that movie? Totally.
Yeah.
I feel like it had potential.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it is, if you look at the very first live action attempt at Batman and Superman, like the old serials, not so good. And so I'm thinking, remember, that's the first time we really, had a shot at Green Lantern in live action. So yeah, it needed some work, but then so did everybody.
Well, what was? I'm curious. What was missing? What
They tried to do
disappointed
too much.
everybody? Was too much.
It's like you had Sinestro, you had Hector Hammond, you
Yeah.
had the Parallax entity. To me, I think focusing on just Sinestro would have been fine.
Well,
Spending the first 20 minutes flying a jet around, that didn't,
Yeah.
get you off to a good start.
Not to the masters, but to I got to answer this. Frankly, they just didn't. There was no context. They didn't really set up. They didn't set it up in anything sufficiently. Like they say, they show him as a jet pilot, then they show him getting the ring, but they don't really. But they just sort of plop him in. They don't really explain the Green Lantern Corps, what he's supposed to do, any of that, and they don't. They certainly don't explain what the ring can do. They don't give us any of that. They kind of just assume we all know that, but the world of it, and then they don't really give him enough to do when it comes right down to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just,
That movie really pissed me off because I really did like all the things you could do with Green Lantern,
Yeah.
all the expanse and the mythology and the universe,
a lot
and
of
I
people
just
were excited for that movie at
I just
first.
got madder and madder as I went through that
It's
thing.
a great franchise, right? It's unlike any other like comic book franchise, really, because it's space opera. And I think and I've actually never seen the movie all the way through at once because I just walk away from it. It's like, oh, this sucks. But I think the biggest problem that I found is that you don't really the movie opens with here's these Guardians and here's a bunch of really cool aliens and this great so you see all the cool shit like in the first 3 minutes of the movie, and then everything else is like, oh.
Anticlimactic.
And so we don't learn any of that stuff through Hal's eyes. Like we've already shown the audience that stuff. And so the wonder of discovery that should be when this human gets to go into space and meet these
The core of this amazing
like
thing.
we've already ruined that surprise, right? And so we already know that's coming. We don't, and Hal's kind of a dick in the movie, so we don't really see it through his eyes because we're not really empathetic with him already. And it's just like, so the wonder of the core and this vast world that should be blowing Hal's mind as well as the reader's mind, that gets ruined in the first 5 minutes of the movie, which strikes me as some studio executive went, you got to explain all this stuff right up front. That's the kind of stuff that studio execs do, which is make it as didactic as possible. And because the guys that wrote that movie are good writers.
Yep.
So it looks like too many cooks in the kitchen to me. And I thought it was ruined 5 minutes in because they show you all the cool stuff and then you're like, well, it's like, I'll say it. So it's like going to a strip show and everybody's naked already. Like you've seen all the good stuff and then they put their clothes back. I'm like, well, this is the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah. Well, again, so that we don't talk too much about Green Lantern, I just had occasion recently to finally watch John Carter of Mars, and it's exactly the same problem, where it's all front loaded.
Here's all the cool stuff.
Here's all the cool stuff. And I said the same thing. Somebody said, "Oh well, we got to see Mars up front, and we got to see this up front, and by the time you get to the actual story,
Yeah,
Exactly what
I
you're
like that
saying.
movie a lot because I think Andrew Stanton's a terrific director. But that again strikes me as some non-creative person
Yep.
said, "Put that stuff up front."
that's exactly what I thought."
You know,
Yeah.
because it's the same problem in both movies.
This gentleman might have had something.
No, you're good. We can go ahead and open it up to questions if you guys have questions.
No, but all this negative, I did have to say one thing positive, okay? Ryan Reynolds looked great as Hal Jordan is as Green Lantern. He looked exactly.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I think he looked exactly like it was when they introduced him on comics. Everything else is true, but he did look. That's the one thing about it. He did physically. He looked like Green Lantern.
They should let that guy do a new superhero movie. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, whatever happened to that guy?
Yeah,
right?
did he amount to anything?
Yeah,
They keep sending him Green Lantern scripts, but he turns them down.
I think he's doing commercials now. or something.
There's something about a soccer team.
Commercials on a soccer team.
That was Green Lantern and a abandoned movie concept franchise. You don't think they'll ever try it?
No,
I think
James Gunn is starting off with Guy
I'd say
Gardner.
it's been long enough now. They'll he's starting the DC universe.
Yeah,
What
stuff-
he's going to do?
Stuff
They'll give it another
Stuff
shot.
is radioactive for a while, and then
2011 or 12, the first one,
That could be about right.
Yeah.
something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, does
Waited
it?
long enough to try to read Fantastic Four. Let's hope it's not another incredible bomb like the other ones.
Yeah.
Oh man.
We'll see.
So audience questions. Anybody out here?
Check.
All right, go ahead.
So with Green Lantern, they have always. I mean, it just feels like Earth has a gluttony of Green Lanterns. But is there any of those people with the mantle that you would have liked to have written or illustrated, as opposed to the ones that you did work with?
Talking about other Green Lanterns,
Yeah, because some of you did have.
I used a shitload of
You had
them.
everybody.
Yeah.
I actually would have been really keen to do more Hal stories because obviously we didn't really get that opportunity. Like we didn't. That's why we did the Emerald Knight storyline that was around issue 100. Is mostly because I wanted to write Hal being hero and being Hal, and that was the way we could do it. Or that was the way I could do it. But I always thought, because when they offered me the book in the first place, I got a call, fairly late at night from DC, and said, "Do you want to do Green Lantern?" It was like 8 o'clock at night, and if the phone rings, and Paul Levitz and Mike Carlin and Denny O'Neil and Archie Goodwin are on the phone, plus the Green Lantern editor, like things are like either really bad or really good. There's not a lot of middle ground to it. So they offered me the book, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. And that, Hal Jordan is basically, Chuck Yeager with a power ring and that Gil Kane costume, and they're like, wait a minute. And then the other shoe dropped. And I was like, well, that sounds cool too. So I eventually took the job, obviously. But that test pilot sort of right stuff take on Hal is my favorite take on Hal, and that's why I think my favorite Hal story is New Frontier by Darwin Cook, because it plays into that. It's set in the '60s, which I think is sort of the perfect era for that take. So if I was going to do more Green Lantern, I would love to go back and do like Hal Jordan in 1968, as a test pilot and maybe an astronaut, because that to me is the sweet spot for where that character works best.
In the movie, did they have Carol Ferris? That whole Ferris was
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, they did.
I don't even remember who played her though.
Was that his girlfriend?
Blake
Blake Lively. Yeah.
Blake Lively.
That was Blake.
Okay.
Well, I guess Green Lantern worked out for somebody then.
Let's say you had a question too.
Yeah, I did. So when it comes to like superpowers or various magic systems and stuff, one of the things that I usually find very satisfying, and I think it's because I grew up playing Magic the Gathering, but is seeing in which ways the established rules can be subverted to do something really surprising. So I guess my question for the panel is, what is the weirdest thing that you have done with the powers? Like, but like not just weird, but like weird and weirdly satisfying at the same time.
I would have to say when I turned Arisia from a teenager into a full-blown woman, that was odd. Got a lot of reaction.
Geez, I think for me, when my first issue was issue 48, and Hal has basically constructed Coast City as sort of this Norman Rockwell town. Because Coast City's been turned into a crater at this point. That happened in the Superman storyline. So those were sort of the cards we were dealt. So, so I had Hal sort of starting to lose his mind, and he creates this bucolic version of Coast City that was, sort of the Norman Rockwell version of what that town would have been for him growing up. And that's where he lives in most of that issue, until the Guardians come down and say, cut that shit out. And then things go poorly. But that take on it, that sort of being able to create the entire world around you was, I don't even know where it was probably in the notes that DC gave me, which was like a page and a half of notes for what Emerald Twilight turned into. But I thought that was an interesting take on what you could do with the ring. You could literally retreat into a different reality.
I liked the issue, was it 100, where Kyle goes back in time and meets young Hal during the right in the middle of his battle with Sinestro. And then, Sinestro was like, oh, another lantern. I know how to stop you with my yellow ring. And Kyle was, was like, what is this yellow? Because, Kyle doesn't have the yellow weakness. And just the look on Sinestro's face, like, wait a minute, that's not fair. It's so satisfying. I'm like, I love it. It's like, you thought you had the answer. This kid was like, oh, yellow weakness, come on. That was very satisfying.
Mine was a little bit different than all of that stuff. It was like almost like a missed opportunity, but I liked what I got to write for the couple pages. I wrote a Solomon Grundy miniseries, and Alan Scott was in that one, and I really enjoyed writing that Alan Scott stuff. And one of the things that happened, one of the initial ideas I had out of that series was that Solomon Grundy was going to break into Alan Scott's house and break his lantern. And I don't even know if I came up with like a real justification of how we all got there, whatever. I don't care. It was just too much fun to do that thing. But the interesting twist on it then was, for a little bit, I knew that Grundy was going to break it. Alan was going to have to come back to rescue his wife because she was trapped in the house that had kind of blown up with the lantern and got smashed. And he does save her and all that stuff. But I wound up with these extra pages in the middle that I wish I could have done a lot farther with or something. But when Alan's green flame then would have been exposed after a lantern breaking, and I had it even like say goodbye to Alan Scott or those kind of things, so it's like a persona that was in there. But I had the energy for like a page or something of that emanate into the different things that were like in the houses or the neighborhood around him. I mean, Alan Scott came back just a couple pages later than that, and he just kind of did a Zen Force kind of thing, and he brought all of it back together, and he drew all the energy back too. But I had a page where like I had some energy go to a squirrel, and some of it go to a car, and all these things were just kind of like supplanted itself and all the different little things around. I'm like, that would have been really cool, fun thing to write for a while. This little miniseries of like a Green Lantern car running around, and good with that stuff.
A little Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah.
Tiny little broomsticks carrying water.
Exactly.
Could have been a Cybertruck.
Yeah.
Well, nobody wants one of those.